Hey guys, in today's video I bring you an absolutely shocking story that will shake everything you believe in. Let's meet Eliyahu ben Shimon, an Orthodox rabbi from Jerusalem who died during a prayer at the Western Wall and came back with a chilling revelation. He saw heaven, hell, and the impossible happened. Jesus was there. What he experienced on the other side will challenge your faith and leave you speechless. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss any content like this. Activate the bell to receive all notifications and comment below which city you're watching us from. Now take a deep breath and prepare yourself for one of the most impactful stories you've ever heard. I remember the smell of the ancient stone that morning. Jerusalem was awake as ever, with its mingled sounds of prayers, hurried footsteps, and the constant whisper of the wind among the alleys of the old city. It was Friday, almost Shabbat. I was at the wall, at the kotel, the place where Jews like me cry, ask, give thanks, and sometimes just lean their foreheads against the sacred rock as if listening to the heart of history beat. My name is Eliyahu ben Shimon. I am 61 years old. Born and raised in Mea Shirim, I was a rabbi since I was 27. My father was a rabbi, my grandfather was too. I never knew another way. My life was Torah, my food, texts, my livelihood, the laws. My entire identity revolved around the covenant that the Eternal made with Israel. That morning I held my clutch firmly. My lips pronounced the Shema Israel for the 1,000th time, but with the same zeal as always. Adon Eloheinu, Adon Echad. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. I have always been against the heresies of the Goim, those who, according to my belief, turned away from the true God to follow a man. I never said his name, I never wrote it down. Whenever someone said Yeshu, I looked away. But that morning, something different was in the air. It wasn't wind, it wasn't sound. It was an strange silence, dense, alive, as if the world around me had stopped for an instant. That's when I felt it. A pressure behind the eyes, a deep hum, almost like the sound of a shofar distant. I tried to lean on the wall, but my legs gave way. The sky seemed to rotate. My fingers lost strength. The clutch fell out of my hand. I saw believers running towards me. Someone shouted my name. Then everything went dark. But it wasn't normal darkness. It was like I had been disconnected. The next thing I felt was absolute relief. A relief that could not be expressed in words. Neither pain nor fear, just awareness. It floated, or rather existed, in a place that was not the world. It wasn't land, but it wasn't heaven yet either. It was between. And it was in this in-between that it all began. Because there, in that space suspended outside of time, something was waiting for me. Something that didn't bend to logic or the doctrines I'd studied for decades. An ancient calling. A presence that knew me before I even knew who I was. And she said to me, without voice, without sound, without text, "You thought you knew, but it's time to see." I don't know if I walked there or if I was taken, but suddenly I was in a space that seemed made up of eternity. No ceiling, no floor, no walls. And yet I knew with all my being that I was in front of something sacred, a place that made the bones of the soul tremble. In front of me was a courtroom, not like those of men with judges in robes and gavels. No, this one was different, majestic, terrible, and at the same time enveloped in a peace impossible to describe. I was alone, but I didn't feel alone. Something, or someone, watched me with profound intensity, not with physical eyes. It was as if the truth in person was in front of me. Books began to appear in the air, books I recognized, from Sefer Torah, from Tanakh, from the Talmud. Pages opened on their own, as if they were alive. I saw myself in there, my studies, my prayers, my decisions, my intentions. I saw the days when I defended the faith. I saw the debates I had in synagogues, the words I taught with fervor. And then, another presence was noticed, stronger than anything I've ever felt, but softer than the brush of a tallit on my skin. At first it was just an impression, a heat, a light, but it grew, got closer, condensed into a figure. Someone was coming. I couldn't stand. I fell to my knees, not by choice, but because something bigger than me crushed me with the glory it carried. It was a man in light, a judge, but not as an ordinary judge. There were marks on the wrists. Light came out of them, not blood, like live coals that don't burn but purify. He looked at me. Oh God, those eyes. There was no trial. There was compassion, and at the same time, an authority so non-negotiable that all my knowledge turned to dust inside me. It was as if every commandment I taught, every parsha I analyzed, every text I memorized now, it has a new face. That man, that look, that silence that said more than 1,000 books. Do you recognize it? A voice asked. It wasn't an external question. It was internal, as if eternity wanted to know if I finally saw it. And at that moment I knew. Not by doctrine, not by logic, not by debate, but by revelation. It was him, Jesus, Yeshua. The one I spent my life denying, not with hate, but with conviction. What I always considered an error, a deviation, a Christian heresy. Now it was there, alive, radiant, and more than that, central. He was the center. Everything revolved around him. The Torah, the prophets, the Psalms, everything. I felt like my soul had been stripped bare, as if my entire existence had been led to this one point. And then, he spoke, with a voice that seemed to contain all creation. You've read the words, but you've never seen the word. In that moment, the truth I thought I knew ripped in half, and I realized everything I experienced pointed to him. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. The ground, or whatever that heavenly ground was pulling me down, not by physical weight, but by immensity of truth that unfolded before me. He was there. Jesus. Not the Jesus of Christian caricatures that I always rejected. Not the maligned Yeshu that my tradition strove to ignore. It was the Lamb. It was the King. It was the greeting itself. What shocked me most was that I didn't feel hate, not afraid, no condemnation. I felt something that broke all my defenses, a love so pure, so deep, so personal that I could barely sustain my own being before it. He didn't accuse me. He knew me. Eliyahu, he said. That name, my name, sounded like never before, as if I had finally found the right echo, as if my name only existed in full when spoken by him. I cried, not out of sadness, for repentance, out of reverence, for recognition. And then, as in a whirlwind of light, the scriptures began to move around us: Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Isaiah, Psalms. Each text floated, opened, illuminated. And there, in the middle of each line, I saw something I had never seen before. His face, the Torah, gained a face. Every sacrifice pointed to his. Every blood shed in atonement was a rehearsal. Each party, a prophecy disguised as tradition. The Lamb of Exodus, the scapegoat of Yom Kippur, the tabernacle of Moses, Mount Moriah of Abraham. Everything was talking about him, and I never saw it. I, who prided myself on knowing the Word, now realized that the Word had a name, a body, a voice, and she was alive. You studied diligently, Jesus said, his eyes fixed on me. You sought sincerely, but you sought shadows, not the substance. That sentence broke me in half. My whole life dedicated to seeking the truth. All my zeal, my teaching, my late-night studying, my advice, my fasting, my vows, my parties, And now I saw that all of this pointed to someone I never accepted, not out of bad faith, but because of spiritual blindness. He approached, not as a judge, but as someone who'd been waiting for me for decades. He extended his hand, and as his fingers touched the air between us, I saw something I'll never forget. The letters of the Torah came out of the parchment and sewed themselves around him. Words became skin. The word became flesh before my eyes. And there, without any more excuses, without any more barriers, without any more pride, I recognized he is. He always was. He is the only way. The tears flowed, but they weren't just emotion. It was like my entire soul was being washed. Every doctrine I defended tooth and nail now bowed before the living truth that I saw with my own eyes. Jesus wasn't confronting me. He was showing me. And that was what hurt most, because it was too pure to be denied, too real to be ignored. You know the stories, he said tenderly, but now you need see them. And at that moment, I was cast into a vision. It was like going through layers of reality. I found myself in a pile that I knew well, Mount Moriah. Abraham was there, old and determined. Isaac, young and submissive. The stone altar, the firewood, the raised knife. I felt the weight of that scene like never before. The tension, the silence, the sky seemed to hold its breath. "Don't touch the boy," the angel's voice echoed. The ram appeared trapped by its horns. And then, the scene changed. Another bunch. Other wood. But this time, no mutton. Jesus carrying the cross. Blood on the face, the body arched. And I understood. In that instant, as if all the layers of my soul were ripped apart at once, I understood what my mind had denied for years. Isaac was spared. Jesus doesn't. The replacement that I always studied was just a glimpse of the definitive delivery. He was the lamb, the ultimate sacrifice. Before I could react, another scene enveloped me. It was the desert. I saw the people falling, bitten by serpents. I saw Moses, lifting a bronze figure on a pole. "Look at her and live," he shouted. I always found this story strange. Why look at the poison symbol? And then the vision overlapped the cross. I saw Jesus there, elevated, like a serpent on a pole, and a verse whispered inside me as if eternity breathed it straight into my soul. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. I trembled. It was not a Christian invention. It wasn't distortion. It was a fulfilled prophecy. I was thrown into another scene. Isaiah, chapter 53. I saw the man crushed, scorned, pierced, the suffering servant. The verses that I studied so many times, always looking for someone who would still come. Now they were alive. I knew. It was him. Every word, every image, every symbol, everyone pointed to the one who stood before me now. And then he looked inside me and said, "You taught the Torah with zeal, but the center was missing." My soul collapsed. I spent my life searching for the truth, and the truth was there. With pierced hands and eyes that cried for me, I could barely breathe, or rather, to feel, because there, in that place where the Spirit speaks louder than the lungs, each revelation was like silent thunder piercing my soul. The name. That name I spent my life avoiding, which I never wrote in any of my texts, which my teachers always replaced with contempt or silence. The name that, among us, was synonymous with error, by diversion, of Christianity. Yeshua. Jesus. The name I never uttered it. Now it burned inside me like fire. He didn't force me to say it, he didn't demand it. It was there. And I knew. If that name came out of my mouth, nothing would be like before. It was the point of no return. The end of the old road. The beginning of another that I didn't even know existed. My heart screamed, but my mind tried to argue. But what about the covenant with Abraham? What about the oneness of God? What about the coming of the Messiah as king, not as a sufferer? Jesus looked at me, and before I said anything, he responded with a look. I am. The echo of these words swept away everything inside me. Yes, I knew them. Moses heard them before the burning bush. I am who I am. Now the I am was before me, not in a flame, on one face, and then he spoke again, low, no rush. You have known the promise, now you are seeing the fulfillment. Those words broke me inside, because deep down, I knew. I always knew the redemption story needed more, that there was something in the spiritual world that still didn't fit, and now everything made sense. The blood on the doorposts of Egypt, the daily sacrifice in the temple, the scapegoat taken to the desert, the veil in the Holy of Holies, everything pointed at him, the name I rejected. He was the only one who saved. And it was at that moment, taken by a reverence that had no place in the body or in the mind, that I did the unthinkable. I whispered, almost voiceless, Yeshua. The name came out, not as heresy, but as liberation, like the truth that was locked away for decades. And now I broke the bars of tradition with the most sacred sound I have ever uttered. And when that name echoed from my soul, I was invaded, for peace, by fire, for love, and for a mission that was beginning to be born right there in the ruins of my old certainty. Jesus was not a mistake. He was the center. When I uttered that name, Yeshua, it was as if the entire sky had bowed in silence. There was no applause. There was no thunder. There was reverence, as if the universe itself recognized that something eternal had just happened. And then the light around us has changed. It didn't get stronger or weaker. It was left more alive, more intimate, as if every particle of that atmosphere knew who he was, as if everything existed there because of him. Jesus looked at me. The tenderness in his eyes was unbearable, not because it hurt, but why he cared. It cured the pride, the rigidity, the limitation of my theology, and without a word, he stretched out his hand, not physically, but with a spiritual authority that pulled me into something indescribable. I was taken, not walking. It was as if my soul was passing through veils. And then I saw it. Heaven. But not like in the books, not like in the stories, not as imagined by human traditions. Heaven was not a place. It was a person. Everything there vibrated in tune with the heart of God. Every ray of light was consciousness, every particle love, but not a weak, human, superficial love. It was a love eternal, perfect, impossible to manipulate, a love that knows you completely and still receives you. I saw beings of light, not with wings and harps, but with eyes shining with fullness. People, souls, essences that had been redeemed, Katir, and now they were at home. There was no envy, comparison, vanity. To joy there, it was collective. When one was happy, everyone cheered. When one worshipped, everyone participated. And at the center of it all, Jesus. But he was not just a sacred character there. It was the very structure of heaven. Everything was for him, through him, and for him. When I looked at him, I saw the reflection of everything I had sought my entire life. The Torah, the altar, the veil, the fire, the glory. Everything was in him. He looked at me, and in a firm but gentle voice he said, "They're not here for construction. They're here because they met me." I wanted to talk, I wanted to protest, I meant, but the Torah. But he already knew. He came closer and said, "The law is holy, but it was never destiny. It pointed to me." And there, at that moment, the last wall of my heart has fallen. The heaven I imagined full of merit, it was in fact heaven of Cordero, and there is only one way to him. Jesus. After the vision of heaven, my spirit was already in pieces, not from destruction, but from reverence. I wanted to stay there forever. I wanted to dissolve in that light, in that harmony, in that love that cannot be compared to anything in this world. But then, something changed. The light began to recede, not abruptly, but like the sunset in slow motion. The melody stopped. Peace has moved away, and I felt cold. Not a physical cold, but the absence of presence. His absence. Jesus was still with me, but distant. He looked at me with sadness in his eyes, and he said, "Now, you need to see the other side." I was taken again, as if I were falling inside myself. And then, the darkness. But it wasn't just any darkness. It was alive, dense, almost conscious. A shadow that rejected the light. I found myself in a place that seemed endless. People, or what was left of them, moved slowly. Some cried in silence, others were paralyzed, others just wandering. What shocked me most was not the external torment. It was the void inside, the total absence of hope, of sense, of joy. It was hell, but not made of fire and tridents. It was made of separation. They knew. Everyone there knew. They knew what they lost. They knew that the light existed. They knew they rejected it, not out of ignorance, but out of choice. And this awareness, it was the torment. I saw a woman near an abyss, his eyes fixed in an invisible direction. She cried without making a sound, with her hand outstretched as if she were still trying to reach the light he rejected. Jesus was by my side again. But now, he cried. It was for them that I came, these. Not to condemn, but to save. My legs gave way. Not out of fear, but for the pain. I felt the heart of God there, and he broke for every lost soul. "But why are you still here?" I asked, choking. He replied with a voice that seemed to tear the universe apart. "Because love invites. But it doesn't force, and pride still blinds them." His words were not an accusation. They were regrets. In that moment, I understood something that no yeshiva had ever taught. Hell is not God punishing. It's the man refusing the only bridge. The only way, the only name, Jesus. And my spirit, now stripped of everything, whispered between sobs. They could also have seen what I saw. When I returned from the vision of hell, it was not the same man. There was no pride, no defense, no doctrinal certainty. Just brokenness. The pain of what I saw still burned within me, but there was also an urgency, as if something within me had been ignited and could no longer be extinguished. Jesus looked at me. His face still carried the glory of heaven, but also the tears of eternal pain. He approached, and at that moment, a book appeared before us. But it was no ordinary book. It was a parchment made of living light. The Aramaic Hebrew letters seemed to leap from the surface like conscious flames, forming lines that danced in the air like fire, obedient to the voice of God. It was the alliance, too old of the sacred, the one I loved, the one I taught. What did I live for? Jesus said with a firm voice. You honored the covenant. You were faithful. I cried. Because those words, they didn't erase my journey. They validated her. But then, he continued, but you tried to carry her alone, and she was never meant for that. The book began to open on its own. Bereshit, in the beginning, Shemot, the Exodus, Vayikra, Leviticus, Bamidbar, Numbers, Devarim, Deuteronomy. And then, the prophets, the Psalms, the writings. Every passage I've studied for decades started to connect. I saw invisible wires connecting everything. Abraham and Isaac on the mountain, the blood on the doors in Egypt, the bronze serpent in the desert, the spotless lamb of Leviticus, Isaiah's suffering servant, The righteous pierced Zechariah. The psalm that said, "They pierced my hands and my feet." All. Everything took to him. And then Jesus said, "I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets. I came to fulfill them." Those words exploded inside me like millennia of dormant truth. I thought knowing the Torah was enough. But now I saw Torah was the map, and Jesus. It was destiny. That book was no longer just text. It was meat. It was life. It was revelation. And I, standing there before him, was no longer a rabbi. He was no longer a master. It was just a man who I finally saw it. And all I could say was, how come I didn't see it before? Jesus smiled, tenderly, truly, with mercy. Because you expected a throne, but I came with a cross. The silence after that sentence seemed to contain centuries. You expected a throne, but I came with a cross. These words echoed inside me as if tearing the deepest veils of my soul, and somehow rebuild me at the same time. Jesus was not there to cancel my story. He was there to fill it, to show me that my fidelity to the Torah, to the people, to the traditions, it wasn't in vain. But now all that needed be brought to fullness. He approached once again and said something I will never forget. Now you are called for more. My heart raced. I knew what he meant, but I also knew what it meant. My family, my community, my identity, my reputation, my ancient faith. All of this would be shattered if I opened my mouth and said what I saw. Why me? The question escaped my lips, almost like a whisper. Jesus looked at me like a father looks at a son who still doesn't understand the mission, but already carries the fire in his chest. Because your heart is sincere, because you sought the truth with love, and because whoever trusts you will listen when you speak. I cried, because those words didn't come from an invitation, they came from a calling. And then, he said, "You will be a bridge between what was and what is, between the alliance you lived and the fulfillment you have now seen." My spirit bowed, not in defeat, but in surrender, like someone who finally stops fighting love and just accept being loved. He continued, "There are others like you, Eliyahu, others who sincerely love God, but they still don't see the full plan. You must go to them, not to accuse, but to reveal." Those words set me on fire inside. It was impossible to stay the same. What I saw, what I heard, what I experienced. I couldn't stay locked in the secret of a scared heart. Jesus looked at me one last time, and with a voice that seemed to contain the entire sky, he said, "What you saw is not just for you, it is to be told." At that time I said yes, not a forced yes, not a religious yes, but a yes from the soul. A broken yes, a true yes. And so the mission has begun. The bridge was built, and now I would have to cross it. Afraid? Yes. In pain? Perhaps. But with the truth? Forever. That yes, I said in my spirit, was like the snap of an invisible rope that tied me to the sky. The light around began to transform, not disappear but retreat, as if I was preparing for a crossing. Jesus approached for the last time. No rush. No pressure, just presence. He placed his hand, or something other than his hand, on my chest, and he said firmly and sweetly, "What I gave you cannot be taken away. Go with courage, go with love, go with truth." And at that moment, I was thrown back. I didn't fall, I crossed. It was like I was going through layers and layers of reality. The light turned to shadow. The shadow became pain. The peace was replaced by noise, fluorescent lights, voices, machines. I opened my eyes, but they burned. The body hurt as if it had been crushed. I breathed, hardly, but I breathed. It was back, at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. The room was full of doctors, nurses, beeping devices, and by my bedside my wife Rachel, her eyes red. The voice choked. Eliyahu. He whispered as if he didn't believe it. I tried to speak. I wasn't able to, but the look gave it all away. In the days that followed, my body slowly recovered, but my soul, this was no longer the same. Raquel understood. My children noticed. My friends found my silence strange. My gaze was no longer what it was before. Had something burning inside me, something I couldn't ignore. On the third night at home, I opened my bookshelf. I pushed through the volumes of the Talmud, the Midrash, the Mishnah, and I picked up a book I had never touched. The New Testament. A Christian had given it to me years before in an interreligious debate. I kept it out of politeness. Now, open it. The first sentence stopped me in my tracks. Book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. My eyes filled with tears. He was at home. In the middle of my story, in my lineage, in my faith. I continued reading. I saw the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, the adulterous woman, the blind healed, a cruse, the empty tomb, and it all made sense. Jesus was not the end of the Torah. Era, the living Torah. When I told Raquel, she cried, very, but it didn't go away. She heard me. My children too. Was it difficult? Yes, I lost friends. I was called a heretic, expelled from circles I frequented for decades. But today, I speak, with authority, truly, with love. Why I died, and I came back. Not just the body, but to real life. To fullness. To the truth that has a name. And that name is Yeshua. Jesus. The only way. The bridge between heaven and earth. Between law and grace. Between the then and the now. If you've made it this far, know, I am a witness. And what I saw, no one can take it away. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.